The purpose of this presentation is to examine mythology and the gods of the ancient world from a biblical perspective. All images, video, and audio clips contained in this video are presented for critical examination and educational purposes only.
Did powerful gods and goddesses actually exist? And if so, where did they come from?
When you look at many of the mythologies around the world, they have these stories of gods coming down from the sky.
There's a beautiful description of the way that the gods move, like when they kind of come down to the earth. You get this sense of them gliding down, but the way that they move is kind of beyond time. It just kind of happens.
If the ancient Greeks invented the stories of gods as a primitive attempt to explain their universe, how can we account for similar deities found in widely different regions and cultures around the globe? Was it mere coincidence? Or was there a common origin for these gods, who supposedly traveled to Earth from the skies?
Welcome back. Our session today is called the Mount Hermon Roswell Connection. And in order to kind of set the stage for this discussion, it's important that we get at least a kind of foundation on fallen angels. Just a little bit of a foundational starting point here with Ephesians chapter 6, verse 12. Paul says that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against rulers of the darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. That's the enemy that we're fighting. We don't wrestle against flesh and blood. We're wrestling against spiritual wickedness in high places. Back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was in the Army. I was in the 1st of the 110th Air Cav, and started out, went through infantry basic training, and then went from there to become a helicopter mechanic and was a door gunner. And then became a helicopter pilot in 1989 and flew for the rest of the time that I was there as a helicopter pilot. And when anybody joins the military, they'll go through some form of basic training. In the Army, we had a book called the Common Soldier's Task Book. And with that book, we had to get that was like our Bible at boot camp. With that book, they had to teach us what our chain of command is, so we knew who we were taking our marching orders from, who do we answer to. And that's important. So you're not getting conflicting orders from different people. You know who you take orders from and who you don't. So you got to know who's your chain of command, who do you answer to. We all had common tasks that every soldier had to perform. We had to know whatever your equipment was that you're operating. They used to say, you have to be smarter than the equipment you're operating. So if you're working on a truck, you got to be smarter than a truck, But you had to know whatever the equipment was. So in my case, the equipment that in my duty assignment was helicopters. So I had to go through training to know how a helicopter works and how to fix it and how to troubleshoot it and all that kind of stuff. People who worked on tanks, they had, same thing. So you had to know your equipment. We all had to know our weapons. Whatever weapons we were assigned, we had to know it inside and out, be able to take it apart with our eyes closed, put it back together, clean it, and do all that kind of stuff efficiently. We had to know tactics. The U.S. military tactics. We had to understand how our troop movements work and all that kind of stuff. So those were all kind of the common soldier's tasks that we had to learn in basic training. After you go through all of that and understand how your military works, you spend the rest of the time getting to know your enemy. You have to know your enemy in order to be able to effectively fight against them. And one of the things that we would do is use flashcards. And we would have to be able to quickly identify. They would show me that line drawing right there, and I would have to quickly identify that's a T-72 Russian tank. I couldn't just say it's a tank. I had to know exactly what the nomenclature was. T-72 Russian tank. Sometimes we used silhouettes. So you'd see a silhouette of an airframe like that. Okay, what is that? And you had to be able to quickly tell you that's an Mi-24 Hind D Russian helicopter. Russian Hind D. I had to know those things very well because I was a helicopter pilot, so I had to know, the difference between this and this. This is a Russian helicopter, and this is an American helicopter. That's an Apache, that's a Hind D. in a combat scenario, those two coming at you, it's, you could see how you could easily confuse them. Now, if he's shooting at you, that's a pretty good indication that's a bad guy, right? But otherwise, we really did have to train to know our equipment as well as the enemy's equipment. Now, I had no idea how much that would come in handy recently. Steve Quayle is another researcher that I've read a lot of his stuff, and he puts out a newsletter and tries to keep people informed about various things that are going on in the world. And back in, I think this was in November, if I remember right, he had sent out a news report saying that there could be what they call a bank holiday, where the banks would all shut down and you wouldn't be able to get your money out. And looking at the way the economy was and the way things are going, the stuff that his so-called intel seemed very believable to me. So I decided to go to the bank, and I didn't have a lot of money anyway. I had an HSA account in there, a few $1,000s, and I thought, I don't believe in doctors anyway, really, so I might as well take the money out of my HSA account, liquidate my bank account, and go get some silver, honest weights and measures, right? So in my mind, I'm thinking, government meltdown, banks are going to close, riots in the street. I'm going to the bank to take my money out and put it in silver. That was my mindset. As I walked out of Chase Bank, I saw that. I took that picture, coming at me over Chase Bank on Park in Plano. And I'm like, oh my God, there's a Russian Hind D coming right at me. And he was literally coming down for a landing, like right over Chase Bank, coming towards me. So I'm freaking out. And you guys remember the movie Red Dawn from the 1980s? Patrick Swayze? Yeah. In the movie Red Dawn, there was a Russian takeover of the country. And the movie kind of opens up with a scene where these kids are in a high school classroom and all these paratroopers land in the football field. And all the kids are looking out the window, what's going on? And the teacher walks out there, hey, what's the matter? Did you guys blow off course or something? And the guy takes out his AK-47 and shoots the teacher and starts shooting up the school. And everybody freaks out and takes off. And Patrick Swayze and his buddies, they form a resistance movement called the Wolverines. Wolverines! So I'm seeing this helicopter come in, and I'm switching into Wolverine mode at this point. I'm thinking Red Dawn, this is it. So I see where the helicopter goes out of my field of view and lands like it's going for a landing somewhere. So I try to go follow where he's at to see what's going on. And so I get on Park, and I'm going down the street, and you know where the Addison Airport is across from the QT down by Prestonwood in Plano? He was landing in that airfield right over there. So I'm at the light just before that airfield, and as I'm sitting there trying to see where the helicopter went, I look up and I see a second one coming in. Now I know for sure this is it. This is the big one. We're having an invasion here in Plano. And so I pull over to the side of you got to put yourself in my mindset. I'm already a conspiracy nutcase anyway, so and I got Steve Quayle's newsletter on my head, and I just liquidated my bank. So I see, and I pull over to the QT gas station right there, and everybody's pulling over. This pretty impressive helicopter coming in there, and everybody's taking pictures with their cell phones. I took that with my cell phone. But a few of us are switching into Red Dawn mode, and we're looking. And I'm looking around for some good old boys that might have a shotgun in their truck, and I might have a pistol or something, And a few of us were talking about potential movement that we might have to do. And meanwhile, the helicopter lands in the field over there, and everybody starts walking out towards it. I'm thinking, didn't you guys see the movie? What are you doing, man? The teacher! I'm thinking I'm going to see a bloodbath. And I'm looking for the second helicopter, because I know I saw two of them. What I later found out was that it was one helicopter. He came in and surveyed the landing zone, then came back around for a second approach and landed. So there's really only one helicopter, but I didn't know it at the time. And as I'm seeing people walk out there, I'm really starting to go into guerrilla warfare mode and think of what we're going to do here. And all of a sudden, the helicopter starts winding down, and some civilians get out of it. And I'm like, what? And turns out there's a Russian air museum down in Lancaster, Texas, and these guys they have old Cold War era Russian equipment there, and they were just going out for a joyride to go get something to eat. They wanted to go get a sandwich at the Firehouse Subway right there on Park, so they decided to take the helicopter out for a joyride to get a sandwich. And so I went, I talked to the guy, and I said, you almost got wasted, dude. He goes, what are you talking about? I said, we were going into Red Dawn mode, and we laughed about it and stuff, had a good conversation. But what that showed me was all of that training that I had prepared me. If that was a real invasion, I was ready. Those people would be like the school teacher. They would have been wasted. They didn't understand what they were seeing. If this was a real world scenario, that would have been very scary. I believe we are called to know our enemy, because Paul says, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades. That means we're not going to be able to tell, you know what I mean? He's going to be hiding. Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Remember what we were talking about before. If any of you have ever read C.S. Lewis' Screwtape Letters, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read it, I think you should, because I think it very well illustrates the devil's tactic and how he gets his demons to set up shop in the church. Now, the Bible. We've talked a bit about the Bible and what has been called extra-biblical books. There's a whole lot of books that are mentioned in the Bible that are not in the Bible. And I've always been intrigued by that. Like when I'm reading the Bible going, well, where are these other books? You know? Obviously, if you believe as I do that the Bible is, or the Scriptures, let's just say, that the Scriptures are divinely inspired, God-breathed, right? God inspired and men wrote. Well, then under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, God seems to be endorsing some of these other books, because a lot of times these books are used as a way of giving credibility to other books and other stories. They'll say, is it not written here? Well, we know it's written here. The Bible itself says, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, you can establish whether a thing is true or not. Multiple times it uses that reference. Well, the Bible itself references 2 books, actually quite a bit. The first book here, the book of Jasher, if I'm pronouncing it right, is not a name, it is a word that means a true or upright, just account. The name refers to the fact that the records, the facts, the history are upright, correct, and thus trustworthy. The Bible references in Joshua chapter 10 and 2 Samuel chapter 1. It's also referenced by name in those 2 witnesses right there. It's inferred in 2 Timothy, where Paul is talking about Jannes and Jambres, the 2 people who opposed Moses. Now, if you read the Torah, if you go through the Old Testament, you find no mention of the names of the 2 guys. You know, the little test, throw down the staff and turn to a serpent. They're not named. So how did Paul know that? The only way he can know that is from the book of Joshua. So clearly Paul, as a learned scholar, studied under Gamaliel, he was well acquainted with some of these other Hebrew texts, like the book of Joshua. The way I look at Joshua, it appears that it was considered very much the same way we consider the works of Josephus today. Today, every theologian, you hear every pastor, sometime at some point in their messages, they will cite something that Josephus said. Why? Because it's generally accepted that he was an authoritative historian of the first century and that he gave good, accurate accounts of things that were taking place in the Jewish histories and antiquities, right? I believe that the ancient Hebrews viewed the book of Joshua as a reference the same way that we view the works of Josephus. And what I find really interesting is the earliest quote being in Joshua about the story of Joshua commanding the sun to stand still. Remember that story in Sunday school? They're fighting the battle and Joshua commands the sun to stand still. That's a pretty extraordinary thing if you think about it, because that means the earth stopped rotating, right? I mean, if the sun stood still, the earth stopped rotating. That's pretty huge. And it's the way you read the text, it's actually not scripture, that part right there, because it says, is it not written in the book of Jasher that Joshua commanded the sun to stand still? In other words, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, it's almost like God is saying, yeah, I know this is kind of a wild story. People might have a hard time believing it. So I tell you what, why don't you reference that book over there, because everybody knows it's a true and upright and just account. That'll give you credibility when you write the story. See what I mean? So many times these books that are not in the Bible that are mentioned are used in a way to give them essentially credibility. Why? Because, first of all, the author of the book of Joshua was well acquainted with that, right? So was the audience, which says if Joshua is the first book that follows the Torah, which was written during the Exodus, Joshua had to have been written either same time as the Torah was, sometime during the Exodus, or possibly even prior to it, for it to have been a work that everybody would be familiar with. See? So I'm thinking, well, here's my take on any extra biblical book, because I grew up with the King James only environment. 66 books of our Protestant Bible are the only ones that exist, right? That has been so ingrained in my mind that just kind of by default, if I look at any other text, if there's anything that I see in conflict with the 66 books, I throw it out. It's got to agree with this. If it doesn't conflict with this, or if it just elaborates on this, or if in other words, if it doesn't in any way go contrary to this, I just say, hey, good information, let's hold on to it, Seems like they did. Why not do the same thing? Now, the other book is the book of Enoch. Now, Joshua, as far as I could tell, was never considered scripture. They just thought it was an authoritative history book. Enoch, on the other hand, was considered scripture, and it popped in and out of canons of Bibles. If you go back and look at the history of Bibles, it's been in and out of the Bible several times. The Ethiopians still have it in the Ethiopian Coptic Bible to this day. It's been quoted quite a bit in the scriptures. We can go back here. There's at least 100 references in the New Testament alone that find precedence nowhere else in the Bible except the book of Enoch. Quoted by Jesus, Peter, Jude, it was widely known as a bestseller, as it were, in the first century, widely known in the first century, viewed as scripture by many of the church fathers. The early church fathers referred to it as scripture, some of them anyway. It's still in the Ethiopian Coptic Bible, and it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'll talk about that a little bit later. That was a very strategic thing, I believe. Joseph B. Lumpkin is the translator of this particular edition of the book of Enoch, and he makes a statement in the foreword. He says, the book of Enoch seems to be a missing link between Jewish and Christian theology and is considered by many to be more Christian in its theology than Jewish. That's why a lot of the Jews began to kind of push it aside after the time of Christ, because if you do read the book of Enoch, there are many things in it that actually do read more like Christian literature than previous Jewish literature. And so people began to kind of, in the Jewish world, began to push it out. So a lot of people were kind of coming against the book of Enoch as time progressed. And I believe the reason for that is because it is an extremely powerful book in explaining who the enemy is and what his tactics are. Interesting thing about the book of Enoch is if you open it up, chapter 1 starts off with this right here. It says, the words of the blessing of Enoch with which he blessed the elect and righteous who will be living in the day of tribulation. When? As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. It's for the people living in the day of tribulation, when all the wicked and godless are to be removed. And he began his story saying, Enoch, a righteous man whose eyes were opened by God, saw the vision of the Holy One in heaven, which the angels showed me. And I heard everything from them, and I saw and understood. But it was not for this generation, but for a remote future one which will come. So the book itself tells you, hey, it's not for now, it's for the future, for the people who are going to be living in the time of tribulation. I think the book of Enoch was preserved for such a time as this. God is faithful to preserve his word. When you put these three books together, you get a really amazing story about the fallen angels, who they were, and what they did. Now, just from the scriptures, the 66 books we now call the canon of Scripture, we know that 1/3 of the angels fell with Lucifer. That's about all we get. I mean, we know about the Prince of Persia, we know the principalities and powers, but they're all vague, kind of broad stroke terms. We don't really know any details. I mean, how much do we really know about that 1/3? Who they were, what did they do? We don't. We don't know much just from the 66 books. We do know that the serpent, Lucifer, is their leader. And the serpent deceived and I ate, the woman said. So the Lord God said to the serpent, because you have done this, cursed are you above all livestock and all wild animals. You will crawl on your belly, and you will eat dust all the days of your life. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring. Whose offspring? The serpent's offspring, Lucifer's offspring. The devil has offspring? And hers. Her offspring, he, this is the first prophecy in the Bible, he, the offspring of Eve, will crush your head, and you will strike his heel. Okay, if you're receiving that prophecy, what are you thinking? If Eve's seed's going to crush your head, what do you think about Eve's seed? What are you going to do with it? You're going to try to destroy it, aren't you? So that your head doesn't get crushed. That's a bad thing, right? Well, what's the first thing he does? Adam and Eve, they produce offspring, Cain and Abel, right? Now Cain said to his brother Abel, let's go out to the field. While they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. Now, if you look at the text, clearly Abel seemed predisposed to listening to the voice of God, whereas Cain seemed predisposed to listening to the voice of the devil. The devil convinced him to kill the good seed, right? Wow, okay, one down. Well, what happens next? Cain gets the mark on his head, he's sent off. How many of you know that if you've lost a child and you have another child, especially if you lose a child to something very traumatic like that, and you have another child, don't you think you're going to become extremely protective of this new child? Probably even overprotective of Seth, the new child that was born, right? So I don't believe the devil was able to get to Seth. So I think the next thing that he did was, okay, let's plan B, Genesis chapter 6. When human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. Now, first of all, the seminaries today, like Dallas Theological Seminary is famous for this, are teaching this, that is talking about the sons of God being the sons of Seth, the good ones, and the daughters of men being the daughters of Cain, the bad one. They teach this in seminaries, and they pump out pastors that teach it to us. What I find extraordinary about that is when you look at the Hebrew, the B'nai Elohim, if I'm pronouncing that right, is the phrase used for sons of God. This is the same exact phrase used in the book of Job when the angels are presenting themselves before God and Satan was among them. Same exact phrase. No scholar has a problem saying that that's angels, but the same scholars will say, well, those are angels in Job, but there's the sons of Cain and all that, sons of Seth and daughters of Cain in Genesis. I'm like, guys, you're playing mental gymnastics with the scriptures. What are you doing? You're teaching lies. Why are they teaching lies? Because it seems inconceivable that angels could come down and mate with humans, so let's just throw out what the Bible actually says. God forbid the scriptures get in the way of our opinions, right? Well, if you let the scriptures speak for themselves, because if it's just cousins marrying each other, how do you pop out 18-footers? I mean, kissing cousins don't produce Goliath. They don't produce Og of Bashan, right? The only thing that explains that is something supernatural. I think if you just let the scriptures speak for themselves, they do. Now, Moses writes, Nephilim. Well, you didn't get very far in the book. You're right in the very beginning of what we call the Bible, Genesis chapter 6, and he's talking about Nephilim, which presupposes that A, Moses knew what the Nephilim were, and B, so did his audience. How did they know that? They had to have gotten it from somewhere, right? They had to have an understanding of what the Nephilim were. I believe they had an understanding because of the book of Enoch, or the teachings, if they were oral at that time, passed down from Enoch a few generations prior. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterwards when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, the men of renown, which we talked about at length in the previous seminar. Is there any proof that they actually existed? Yes, I believe there's plenty of proof. First of all, I just believe the scriptures, again. But you might have seen pictures like this circulating around the internet. A lot of people are saying they're frauds. They could be. I'm an expert in Photoshop. I could make things look very real and make you believe that they're real. So that could be Photoshop. But it could also be real. Because nowadays, whenever giants show up, Steve Quayle has done an amazing job of documenting the finds of giants. And what seems to be happening a lot in the last few centuries is the government shows up, the Smithsonian shows up, the Vatican shows up, these various organizations will show up, cleanse the area, totally, discredit those guys, and destroy or hide the evidence. Fortunately, we still have a lot of well-known ancient texts that still support and show that these things actually existed at some point. And you got these conehead, these are very large skulls, and they're very interesting. They come out of Peru. And look at this guy right here, standing at the Mount Blanco Fossil Museum, standing right next to a femur bone. I mean, look how big that is. Come on. Jawbone compared to a cast of a normal jawbone. You've seen this in the previous seminar. These are documented finds throughout history. This one here, a 36-footer, confirms what we were talking about the Amorites, starting about 35 feet, going 150 feet. This guy was apparently found by the Carthaginians in 600s AD. Rockwall, Texas. Right in our back door. Rockwall, Texas. Do you know why it's called Rockwall, Texas? It's because back in the 1800s, the late 1800s, a guy was digging around, digging a foundation or something, and his shovel hit some rocks, and so he's kind of digging a little more and realized that it's actually a wall. Kept digging and saw, man, this is a really long rock wall, hence the name rock wall. They excavated this whole area. They found a really long rock wall that was submerged, had been buried, and they got down underneath there and they cut a hole in an area and they went in and found a dwelling place where they found a cauldron that had human skeletal remains in it. So apparently somebody, was eating people, I guess. Then they found a skull 3 times larger than any other human skull currently today. Some kind of cannibalistic giant lived in Rockwall, Texas. Where's the evidence now? They put a reservoir over it. The reservoir in Rockwall is covering this, but you can go back to news clippings and news articles from the 1800s and find what they're talking about there, right in our back door here in Texas. Now, the book of Enoch goes into a lot of detail about the fallen angels, who they were and what they did. Says that they landed the Watchers. The Watchers are a class of angels. We got archangels, you got seraphim and cherubim, different classes of angels that we're aware of from the scriptures. Watchers is another class. It's actually mentioned in the book of Daniel. That particular class is mentioned, I think, in chapter 7, if I remember right. But the book of Enoch goes into a lot more detail. Talks about the class, 200 angels or watchers who descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon. That's where they landed to do what I call the Genesis 6 experiment. And it gives the names of about 20 of them. It says 200, but it names about 20 of them as sort of the captains or the leaders over those 200. And Semjaza was the leader of all of them. And they knew what they were about to do was a very bad thing and that God was going to be extremely upset about it. And so Semjaza says, hey, what we're about to do, I know it's not going to go over well. And I have a feeling I'm going to go through with it, but you guys aren't going to follow through with me. And everybody else said, no, we're with you. And they all took a vow together to go through with the plan, and that's why it was called Mount Hermon, based on their mutual oath that was taken there at Mount Hermon. Now, there's a name that's not listed there. He's listed in another passage further on in Enoch by the name of Azazel. Azazel is named as the worst of all of those fallen angels that participated in Genesis 6 experiment. Azazel was said to have taught the art of digging up metals from the earth and creating weapons for warfare. He created the art of war, if you will. And a lot of this stuff, the angels were teaching the humans things that God didn't want them to know, basically. And a lot of bad things were happening. The whole creation was becoming corrupt, and people were killing each other, and a lot of bad things were happening. So the good archangels, we know of at least 2 from the 66 books, Gabriel and Michael, right? But a lot of the other Hebrew texts talk about 2 others, Uriel and Raphael. Raphael was told by God to bind Azazel in chains and bury him in a place called Dudael, where he shall remain until the time of judgment, and ascribe all sin to Azazel. God said, put all sin on Azazel. Well, that's very interesting because when you get into the Torah and you look in Leviticus, I think it's Leviticus 16 if I remember right, where they're doing the sacrifice and they send the scapegoat out. It says, depending on your translation and how much they tried to help us with our translation, the good translations, the originals, say, send them out to Azazel. They were sending the goat out to the one that God said, ascribe all sin to Azazel. The other scripture we're familiar with, Isaiah 1:18, I believe, though my sins be as scarlet, they are made white as snow. We're also familiar with that one. That actually comes from the practice of the scapegoat. They would tie a scarlet ribbon around the horns of the scapegoat, cut a piece of it off, send the goat out to Azazel, and take that piece and put it on the tabernacle or temple door. And overnight, supernaturally, it would change from scarlet red to pure white. And it would show them that God had accepted their sacrifice. It approved. Now, interesting thing about that is for 40 years leading up to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, it did not turn white. Track back 40 years from the destruction of the temple, and what do you got? You got Yeshua. Where God's saying, okay, I'm done with that system. I've sent my sacrificial lamb. Forget it. Interesting piece of history. But it's associated with Azazel. And you have no clue who Azazel is unless you have an understanding of some of these other texts. And yeah, this is where they landed. Google Earth, I love playing with Google Earth. When the 200 angels came down to earth, this is where they landed. This is Mount Hermon in southern Lebanon, which is just kind of at the very top. Now, what's kind of pretty wild about this is as you zoom out, keep that spot right there in your view. Maybe it's just my imagination, but I was like, hey, that's kind of weird. That's where they landed in the days of Jared. Now, there's a guy by the name of David Flynn who's done some extraordinary research on this, and there's a picture of Mount Hermon today. If you go on Google Earth, you can put a marker there at that location. What's 1/3 of 100? 33.33%, right? That location is 33.33 degrees north by 33.33 degrees east from the Paris prime meridian, which used to be the true prime meridian before they changed it for political reasons. And if you go back and look at the history of the Paris prime meridian, it's also known as the Devil's Line for people who practice ley lines and the occult and all that kind of stuff. Now, David Flynn was the one that kind of picked this up, but you can go on Google Earth and check it for yourself. That's what I did. You'll see the location there if you can read that. The longitude is 35.54, but if you subtract the difference between the Greenwich, because that's from Greenwich, if you subtract the difference, you get 33.33 on the Paris. So that's the Paris prime meridian. He also discovered that that location is 2012, there's that magic number again, nautical miles from the Paris prime meridian, 2012 nautical miles to the equator. Is that coincidence? I don't believe in coincidence. I was on tour with Alvin and the Chipmunks back in the 90s in the theater. I was doing theater, and I was David Savell. Alvin! That was me. Traveling around the country, and we're unloading a truck one day, and the roadie that was helping me, the word coincidence came up in the conversation, and he said, you know, my mother always told me that coincidence is just God being anonymous. I said, dude, I'm going to remember that forever. Still use it, because that's, I think, exactly, every time we think it's just a coincidence, no. There's something going on there. Yeshua said, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. Let's look at that chart again that we had before. Day 1, day 2. Something else that's interesting about this chart, and I've got the full chart, I'm still working on it, but it says, Scripture says that days with the Lord is 1,000 years is a day. I thought, So I made the columns, okay, day in God time, day 1, our time 1,000 years, divided up by jubilees. But I decided to put in the header up here the scripture of what took place on day 1. And it's pretty wild if you look at what took place on each of the days of creation and what happened during the 1,000 years that correspond with that day. They actually line up pretty well with the days of creation, what God did. What happens on day 4? The sun and the moon, right? The sun shows up. What happens at the end of the first 4,000 years? The Son of God showed up. You know, it's just, I know that's English, son and son, but still cool, I think. Anyway, I believe that there was definitely something going on after the flood, but I do not believe it was a second incursion. That's what a lot of people who talk about Nephilim will say, that there was, because Numbers 13:33 talks about there are giants in the land of Canaan, right? Well, there were giants before that, so how did they show up? And they take the scripture, Genesis chapter 6, where it says, the sons of God appeared unto the daughters of men, and they had children by them, became great men of renown, and Nephilim and all that. Well, they take that scripture where it says, this happened whenever the sons of God came down to the daughters of men, as to read as if again and again and again. The sons of God came down to the daughters of men again and again and again. It doesn't say that. You could take that same scripture and interpret it another way. The way I interpret it is that as a result of what happened before the flood, it carried, the consequences of that carried forward after the flood. And the reason I say that is because I can find no evidence from Scripture. I mean, we're both arguing from silence, okay? But we have to use other ways of figuring things out to come to this conclusion. There is no mention of angels mating with women after Genesis 6, using just the Scripture. So based on that, we're both arguing from silence. They believe, well, see, you know, they came and they continued to do it. I say no. And the reason I say no is because, I have several reasons actually. The 200 who landed on Mount Hermon in the days of Jared received an extremely severe punishment from God. We know this from the Scriptures. I chose to use the Weymouth New Testament translation of this 2 Peter passage because it's most accurate from the other ones that I could find, where it says, for God did not spare angels when they had sinned, but hurling them down to Tartarus, consigned them to caves of darkness, keeping them in readiness for judgment. Your translation says probably sent them down to hell and everlasting chains of darkness. Hell is an sort of accurate translation, but it's more accurate to use the Greek word there, Tartarus, because hell was divided up into 3 compartments. The upper tier, known as paradise to the Greeks, or Abraham's bosom to the Hebrews. Hell, or Sheol, the place of the dead, the bad guys, so it's where you got Lazarus up here in paradise, Abraham's bosom, and the rich man down in this other place in torment, right? There's two compartments there and a great chasm that separated the two of them. The third compartment is the lowest one, called Tartarus. The Greeks understood Tartarus to be the place of the prison of the Titans, the gods. When the Olympians overthrew the Titans, they put them in the prison called Tartarus. It's a very scary, very bad, horrible place, and that's where they are. And for Peter to have quoted that, first of all, Peter had to have an understanding. Again, looking at the scriptures from a mythological worldview, Peter had to understand the world that he lived in, which was run by the Greeks, through the Romans at the time. Romans just adopted the Greeks. Zeus became Jupiter. They kind of copied a lot of the same gods, just changed their names. But what Peter's talking about angels that when they sinned. Well, what's he talking about? If you're just reading the 66 books, you don't really know what he's talking about. Jude says basically the same thing. Jude says, "And the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness unto the judgment of the great day." Very similar passage right there. Now, Jude, by the way, basically cut and paste entire paragraphs of Enoch right into his very short, strange, kind of freaky book anyway, which shows, again, validation and credibility right there for the other book. Now, Revelation 9, the Apostle John also references these fallen angels, where he says, saying to the sixth angel, which had the trumpet, "Loose the four angels which are bound in the great river Euphrates." What's up with that? Where do those guys come from? Again, it presupposes that John knows what that's all about and that his audience knows what that's all about. We don't know what it's all about because they took those books out and they won't let us see them. You have to go looking for it. This is interesting. I'm not going to go ahead and read that whole thing, but in the book of Enoch, what you see happening is the fallen angels, when God starts to get really angry, they realize, well, boy, we knew it. This was a wrong thing to do. We shouldn't have done it. They basically try to hire Enoch as their attorney. Basically, and make the petition on their behalf before God to try to get forgiveness. Now, God says, okay, I'll play your game. Okay, well, Enoch, you can play attorney, the attorney if you want. Here's what you're going to tell them. No, I do not forgive you, and no, you will never have peace. And oh, by the way, how many of you would like to see your children massacred? Anybody? No. That's the first thing God made the fallen angels do, is watch their children, the first generation of Nephilim, kill each other off. Within 500 years, the first generation of Nephilim were to kill each other off, according to the book of Enoch. And they had to watch. After they watched their own children being killed off, now during that time, those 500 years, they were able to do an awful lot and have other children. But that first generation of children were killed off. Then the fallen angels were judged and bound and buried all throughout the ancient Middle East. A lot of them probably in Iraq and Persia. It kind of helps explain some of the principalities and powers and the spiritual wickedness and the prince of Persia that's talked about in the book of Daniel. And when Enoch kind of gives them the bad news, it says, "Then I went and spoke to them," them being the fallen angels, the watchers, all together, "and they were all afraid, and fear and trembling seized them, and they besought me to draw up a petition." They were terrified by what was being pronounced upon them. And to back that up right there too is the passage there in Luke with the maniac of Gadara, where he had a legion of demons inside of him. Notice what it says. When he asked them the name, they said legion because many demons have gone into him. And they begged Jesus repeatedly, "Do not order them to go into the abyss." Terrified of the abyss. Nobody's going to volunteer for another Genesis 6 experiment. Not going to happen. That's one reason I don't believe it happened. Another reason. The pre-flood giants, as we talked about in the previous session, were known as the Titans to the Greek. That's the Kraken from the Clash of the Titans movie. They were huge, 3,000 ells, 300 cubits, 450 feet, massive creatures in the pre-flood situation. So when you mate angels with human women, you get 450 footers. After the flood, they're smaller. Now, this is this passage right there, so that's where I get that Enoch chapter 7, where it says their great height was 3,000 ells. But after the flood, the difference between the Titans and the Olympians, what the Greeks called the Olympians, the first generation of Nephilim were 3 to 4 times larger than the tallest of the post-flood giants. So what's going on there? And we talked about this right there in Amos also, that the Amorites were still pretty big, right? 35 feet to 150 feet. according to Amos, as tall as cedar trees, they're still not 450 footers. So clearly something is happening. There's some sort of diluting of the genes, if you will. The third reason is that using that chart that I showed you before, the Nephilim that were on the earth in the days before the flood had 1,000 to 1,200 years, and the scriptures say that they had totally corrupted the entire planet. All of creation had been corrupted except for the ones God preserved on the ark. If only 200 angels were able to produce offspring that totally corrupted the entire planet in just 1,000 to 1,200 years, and if they could repeat that, they've had 5 times as long to do so. Right? The earth should have been totally corrupted 4 or 5 times more. Another reason why I do not believe angels came down and mated with women again. Now, the scriptures themselves, I believe, bear out the thesis that I have, is that we talked about the Numbers chapter 13 there, where the spies went into the land and they gave their report. They said that the descendants of Anak come from the Nephilim. They come from who? They come from the Nephilim. The Nephilim are the offspring of the angels and the women. There's no mention of angels here. So the giants that were in the land were giants that came from giants. That's why I say that what was started in Genesis 6 perpetuated somehow. How did it perpetuate? Well, I believe Amos gives you a clue right there. They destroyed the Amorites, which were the ones that are as tall as cedars, remember? Giants. Amorites are descendants of who? Canaan. They are the descendants of Canaan. So it is my belief that Nephilim's seed was able to survive the flood because it entered the ark through the only logical one we have left to choose is the wives of the 3 sons. If Noah was pure, and actually if you go in the Hebrew on that, it says he was upright and just. He says righteous in his generations. The phrase righteous in his generations is the word tamim. It's the same word used in reference to the red heifer, where they have to go out and get a pure red heifer without spot or blemish. It's talking about genetically pure. So yeah, Noah was upright and just. He was a good guy, but he was tamim. He was pure genetically pure. When God looked down to the earth and saw the whole earth had been corrupted, the only one that was left that he could bring his good seed, the Messiah, through was Noah. And by extension, I would say Noah's wife, which the extra-biblical texts, as we say, show that he married Enoch's daughter. Enoch walked with God and was not, for God took him, so he was clearly a good guy, so presumably his daughter was. Good choice for Noah. She's 100 years older, but hey, you live in 950 years, what's 100 years? Right? But, and so by extension, if Noah is pure and his wife is pure, then obviously Shem, Ham, and Japheth had to be pure as well, right? What's left? Noah had to pick 3 wives for his 3 sons. Well, if the whole earth is corrupt, I think Noah did pretty good, all things considered, but he was pretty limited in his choices, wasn't he? The extra-biblical texts say that he took the wives from Eliakim, who was Methuselah's brother. Eliakim fell in the category of those who had gone corrupt, as also did Lamech, by the way, Noah's father. So Methuselah was a good guy. Noah was a good guy. The flood started 7 days after Methuselah's death. And I believe his name actually means with his death comes judgment or something to that effect. So I believe that it passed through genetically as a result of at least Ham's wife, but possibly also Japheth's wife as well. Now, this is just a theory. It's just my theory regarding that strange passage in the scriptures where it says that Ham found his father naked in the boat, Noah, and Noah wakes up and he curses his grandson. The story really doesn't make any sense. Ham came in and supposedly did something, whatever it was he did. Noah got upset about it. You would think that Noah would curse his son, but he doesn't. He bypasses his son and curses his grandson, which says to me that his grandson had to be there for him to curse him, which means this is right after the flood. So Canaan was either born immediately after the flood or was born on the ark. He's the firstborn of the sons of Noah, is Canaan. And so my belief is that Canaan had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Why do I believe that? Because his descendants did. The genes had to get passed on somehow. Goliath and his brothers, it talks about the giants that were found. The giants had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Those were descendants of Canaan. So I believe what happened was that Noah looked down at his grandson, saw 6 fingers and 6 toes, realized that that's the reason why God destroyed the entire earth in the first place, was because of these 6 fingers, 6 toes dudes, and said, oh boy, here we go again. That's where I believe the post-flood Nephilim come from. Based on the testimony of Moses and Amos and on the striking lack of any mention of angels in association with all post-flood accounts of giants, I have to believe the Nephilim seed continued via genetics, not copulation. And I'm often accused of, well, why would God allow Nephilim seed on the ark? And they say that's absurd. I said, well, back up a minute and consider your theory. Your theory is even more absurd. The idea that if God had to destroy the entire planet because of the activity of fallen angels marrying women and producing Nephilim, why would God allow that again the second time? It makes more sense to me that he would allow this to go through. People say, why? I said, so he would get glory. Why does God do anything? Everything God does is for his glory. He got glory for the flood. How did he get glory for the destruction of the Nephilim after the flood? He got glory through his people, through the Israelites, through Joshua and Caleb. 80-year-old guys took out 50-footers, 100-footers, Canaanites, Amorites. A little shepherd boy took out a 12-footer. God got the glory through his people. Why does God do anything? So I think their argument's even more absurd than what I'm proposing. And besides, if all they had to do was have sex, what's the deal with alien grays and genetic experimentations, right? Why the need for all that? I don't believe that these guys are from Arcturus or from Orion or from any other planet out there. These are demons. It's repackaged Genesis 6 activity. If all the angels had to do was have sex, there'd be no reason for alien grays and scientific experimentations and extraction of genetic material. And it's not just people. They're cattle mutilations. It's well documented. This stuff's not crazy. This stuff is real. A farmer looks out in his field and finds a cow completely mutilated with laser precision cut, organs removed from its body, no blood. What's up with that? My belief is that these guys are nothing more than biological suits for the disembodied spirits to inhabit. Because after Yeshua showed up, a demon would go into a person and then a Christian would show up and cast them out. So the devil's got a problem now. Every time we go into people, Christians cast us out. Now, they're still doing it. Obviously, people are still demon-possessed. But what if they could create their own little biological suits? There's an awful lot of harvesting of genetic material. That brings us to Roswell, New Mexico. Alien grays. As soon as you start talking about alien grays, you got to go to Roswell, New Mexico, right? Interesting thing is that the supposed crash in Roswell, New Mexico actually didn't happen in Roswell. It happened kind of northwest, I guess, of Roswell. Roswell got all the fame because that was the nearest town that, they went and reported it. But David Flynn, again, went out there with a team of researchers back in 2005 with GPSs and a bunch of other stuff to go kind of check the area out where that supposed crash happened, and discovered that Roswell, the location of the crash, was also on the 33rd parallel. And when they multiplied it by the universal constant of pi, it gave them the longitude 104. Coincidence, right? 1947. That's an interesting year. 1947, 1948. Very interesting things happened in 1947 and 1948, right? What happened? Israel became a nation in 1948, but the decree for them to do so happened in 1947. What also happened? This happened, and at the same time, somewhere around that time frame, a little shepherd boy, Bedouin shepherd boy, throws a rock into a cave, here's a jar crack, and out pops the Dead Sea Scrolls, and oh yeah, the book of Enoch that says it's for the people in the future generations going to have to deal with this stuff. Coincidence, right? I think it's directly connected to the days of Noah, and I don't know if you've been seeing it or not, but a lot of the mainstream news reports have been showing UFO sightings. Lots of them, increasingly so. I went on and online and found a bunch of news articles, mainstream news videos, and put together a UFO montage of recent UFO activity. I'm talking just within the last couple of years.
Scientists left baffled by an unexplained circular light seen hovering high over Moscow on Wednesday evening. People described seeing a wide circular formation in the sky.
Scientists from all over the world are trying to figure out what caused a mysterious blue light to spiral in the sky over Norway on Wednesday.
As UFO sightings go, this one was as good or as weird as it gets.
Early yesterday morning, just before dawn, this appeared in the Norwegian sky. A blue light, small at first, growing into a spiral, and then disappearing into what appeared to be a black hole.
Thousands of Norwegians bombarded the Meteorological Institute to ask what that light could have possibly been. Some feared it could have been a meteor, others a black hole, and there are even those that thought it could be aliens.
A strange spiralling white light was spotted in the early morning sky over Sydney, with even skeptical witnesses wondering if it was a UFO. The unusual sight was recorded by hundreds of people from Victoria north to Queensland.
A spiral in the sky around a bright light.
A UFO in China's skies forced Zhoushan Airport to stop operations on July 7th. Outbound flights were grounded after the unidentified flying object was detected by a flight crew. For now, the UFO continues to be a mystery.
Some Chinese residents are on edge this morning after another apparent UFO sighting. It's the second one in 2 weeks. The first sighting was on July 7th, and an airport had to be shut down.
All right, that's a UFO if I've ever seen one.
Yeah, can you identify
it? That's undeniable.
The airport had to be shut down after people apparently saw twinkling lights above the airport terminal. 17 flights had to be diverted. The latest sighting happened just 2 days ago, and people say they saw 4 lantern-like objects forming a diamond shape in the air, hovering in the sky for over an hour. And aviation experts say they don't know what it was.
Strange and mysterious lights hovering above East El Paso tonight. What's even more strange, very similar lights were spotted in Manhattan just 2 days ago. Above the skies of Northeast and East El Paso tonight, a sight that was a little more than stunning. This is what one of our photographers, Ram Moreno, caught on video. One solitary light that appears to be falling in the sky. But that light suddenly breaks apart into 2, then 3 separate lights. Those lights then just freeze in the air and begin to hover. Eventually, a 4th light can be seen. Then the lights appear to be hovering and then moving in a strange pattern. Then they all disappear. Just 2 days ago, in the sky above Manhattan, people froze on the street there as they saw these 3 lights hovering in the middle of the day. And check this out. The 3 lights are close to each other, then spread out into this triangle pattern. Now, look at the patterns side by side. This from Manhattan and the other tonight in El Paso. I gotta tell you, they do look eerily similar.
People are looking up. It's because of a mystery in the sky. Is it a balloon, a UFO? Whatever it is, it sure has a lot of people talking. Eyewitness News reporter Jeff Begase is live in Chelsea, where crowds have gathered. Jeff, what's this all about?
Well, Sade, we don't know.
Michio Kaku is a theoretical physics professor, and back on the screen, what is it?
We don't know. We are stumped. Scientists around the world are saying, what the heck is this object?
sons of God saw the daughters of men that they would bear,
Look at that.
and they took them wives of all which they chose.
Oh my gosh.
There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them,
What is that?
the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown.
Oh my gosh.
Disclosure is very close, and the American people need to prepare themselves very soon for an announcement from our government that there is, in fact, extraterrestrial presence engaging this planet and the human race.
That's just in the last couple of years. Something's happening and we can't ignore it anymore. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be the coming of the Son of Man. What did we talk about earlier? Fallen angel activity is increasing, and it's only going to get worse as the days draw closer to the return of Christ. How many churches are talking about this? Nobody. My friend L.A. Marzulli is fond of saying this quote, UFOs are real, burgeoning, and not going away. He's also fond of saying, rebuke first, ask questions later. Because he's got a series called The Alien Interviews, and he's interviewed a whole lot of people who claim to have been abducted and gone through horrific scientific experimentations and whatnot on them. And Dr. David Jacobs was a skeptic, was a professor at a university, and was interviewing supposed UFO abductees. And after years of doing those interviews, he came to the conclusion, the same thing. UFOs are real, burgeoning, and not going away. This stuff is really happening. But what came out of those interviews was they're not going to produce 12-footers, 18-footers, 150-footers like they did before. What they're doing right now is they're trying to genetically create hybrids that look exactly like us.
There's never been a phenomenon like this. This is completely unprecedented. Everything that happens on board is for a reason, everything is logical, everything is rational, and everything is understandable with enough information. This was not a learning experience, and it wasn't an experiment. They weren't trying to figure out what makes us tick. The evidence suggested that this was a program. There is a reason for this program to be put in place. That's what the evidence clearly points to. What was happening was that people were talking about this reproductive material. People were having sperm taken, they were having eggs taken. People report that they were having embryos injected into them and sometimes retrieved from them.
What we conclude is that maybe these people are creating hybrids, creating a special race of people with DNA from us, human DNA, and with the alien DNA, creating people that are, I guess, more intelligent, more sophisticated. And I have heard other people tell me stories alluding to that effect.
I began to hear accounts of abductees who were taken into a room and their attention would be directed to a screen-like device. And on the screen, there would be a scene of normal human activity. A picnic, kids playing ball, guys standing around a grill, people talking to each other. And they'll hear in their mind, can you tell the difference between you and us? And the person will look at the screen and say, no, everybody looks the same to me. And they'll say, see, isn't that wonderful? Isn't that great? Soon we will all be together. Soon it will be wonderful. Soon everybody will be happy. Now, you hear that once. It's not a pattern. You hear that once, you just discard it. Interesting, who knows? But when you begin to hear it over and over again, then suddenly it has different meaning. This is from other people who are not aware of this testimony. And then I began to understand that what they were telling these abductees, what these beings were telling these abductees, is that ultimately this is an integration program into the society, not with gray aliens most likely, but with these hybrids who look quite human. For years and years and years, people would write to me and say, oh, well, are adult hybrids walking among us? And the answer is absolutely not. There's no evidence whatsoever that that's the case. But the evidence that I've been getting recently in terms of the goals of the program is that that might be the case. I don't really know yet. It's possible. And I am embarrassed even to say that. I'm embarrassed. And yet, it fits the pattern of all the evidence that I've been hearing for the past 20 years. It's focused on hybrids. The reproduction is to reproduce hybrids. And it does appear to be an integration program, as crazy as that may sound.
This is the testimony of thousands of people. I'm not making this stuff up. So what's that all about? One of the things that I find interesting about the book of Revelation, it talks about those who follow the beast. It says those are those whose names are not written in the book of life from the foundation of the world. Scripture says that our name is written in the book of life, and if we reject Christ, don't accept Christ, our name is blotted out. Well, how could you blot something out unless it was there in the first place? That says to me, God says God is not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance, and I believe the proof of that is He put your name in the book. And we just got to confirm our reservation, so to speak. Yes, I accept your payment for my reservation. Oh, you reject it? Sorry. It's blotted out. The ones who follow the beast, it says, are those whose names were never written in the book of life. Who are these guys? Probably people who are never meant to exist in the first place, just like the Nephilim were never meant to exist in the first place back in the days of Noah. When I look at some of these videos and stuff, and look at this research, it can be really hard sometimes not to get afraid. You know, that stuff in Kazakhstan, I just put a few, that whatever it was in Kazakhstan there, that last one, really wild. And apparently Kazakhstan, I've been to Kazakhstan twice actually, and the scene, one of the scenes before that showed the news reporter and that thing hovering over the city there. That was in Almaty, Kazakhstan. I've been to missionary conferences in Almaty, Kazakhstan, right where that shot was taken. All right, apparently Kazakhstan, whatever's going on over there, it's a new UFO hotspot. But the scriptures say the devil ramps up his activity in the last days because he knows his days are short. Daniel says that in the last days knowledge shall increase. It's actually the knowledge. There's the hey. The hey represents the word the. It's the knowledge. I believe all this stuff we're talking about here is a part of the knowledge so we can understand the days that we live in so that we don't fall prey to the coming great deception that Yeshua warned us about.
On the 13th of December 1973, French journalist Claude Vorion was driving through the volcanic area of Clermont-Ferrand, central France, when suddenly he noticed a bright, flashing light in the sky, heading in his direction. And as it got closer, he saw that it was made of a grey metallic substance, the shape of a flattened bell. Claude was invited into the craft, and over the next 6 consecutive days, the extraterrestrial dictated a series of messages which are both clear and revolutionary. This is what the extraterrestrial said.
We created humanity. You mistook us for gods. We were the ones who started all the religions on Earth. And now that humanity is capable of understanding this, we would like you to build an embassy where we can land officially in front of everyone. A long time ago on our planet, we had reached a stage similar to the one you are in now. Our scientists were beginning to design life through the synthesis of DNA. The whole of our society watched with fascination as they created more and more sophisticated organisms, daring each time to make an even more beautiful and sophisticated model of living art.
Many ancient texts point to the work of these scientific creators. Let's open the Bible at the book of Genesis.
Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. Genesis 1:26.
At the time, the human beings called these extraterrestrials Elohim, which in ancient Hebrew meant those who come from the sky. It's found in the original Bibles, but in more recent times was mistranslated by the word God. It's important to realize that this is a plural, the singular being Elohah. References to the Elohim can also be found in other ancient texts. For example, in the writings of the Hindu, Greek, Egyptian, and Amerindian civilizations. We can read even today about the many gods who had human emotions and who lived near or with these human beings. These gods talked to human beings and even had relations with them.
I'm not afraid of this stuff. I'm not. Actually, my heart breaks because I know how many people out there aren't going to have a clue. I mean, seriously, what's going to happen when these guys finally do pop out and said, hi, we're the Anunnaki, we are your creator. Remember the Nazca lines in Peru? Remember all the cuneiform tablets in Sumeria? And they point to all these ancient artifacts as proof that they are our creators. That's what they say. The ancient texts say that the Anunnaki created us, not God. They tinkered with genetic material from primates and turned them into Homo sapiens. That's what the ancient texts say. So what happens when these guys park over our cities with major, mile-wide ships and make that claim? What's it going to do to the average Christian's faith? Like I said, this may sound crazy, may sound like tinfoil hat-wearing stuff, but you got to remember in Stephenville, Texas, just a few years ago, there was a mile-wide ship that parked over in Stevensville. And you just saw everything that's been going on around the world, and it's increasing. Stuff is real. But, thank God, Scriptures say, fear not, for God hath not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. How many Christians do you know are walking in power? Now, I'm preaching to myself. All right? We've got to understand this power stuff. Everybody says God is in control. I understand that. God created the universe. Of course he's in control. However, the same God has bound himself by his word. What did he say? Go, you human beings, go have dominion on the planet. Dominion means have control. God bound himself by his own word that everything that takes place on this planet is going to be done by man. But he says, I'll help you. You go all the way back to the Torah. Moses is standing there, 2 million Jews, Pharaoh's army coming in the back, ocean in front. God, what do we do? What does God say? What are you looking at me for? You got the rod, you do it. That's my paraphrase. God told Moses to do it. Moses raises a stick, God worked through him, ocean split, they go through. Same thing happens all through the scriptures. That's why God had to come to earth as a man in the first place. Because he said everything that's going to happen here is going to happen through man. So when we're all like, God's in control, he's saying, yeah, but I put the control in you. You guys got to do stuff. I'll do it through you, but on earth it's got to happen through you guys. These things have I spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. Not freaking out. Don't go nuts. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. You are of God, little children, and have overcome them, whoever them they are. Because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world or in the sky, I would submit. I've used the word Yeshua quite a few times, and I've already said it before. I've become very fond of that name. You know, like I said, I do believe there's power in the name of Jesus. I got saved in the name of Jesus. I've led people to Christ in the name of Jesus. I've seen people set free, healed, and delivered in the name of Jesus. But the name Yeshua is extraordinary. In Hebrew, it means salvation, but every Hebrew letter has multiple meanings. There's a Hebrew idiom that says every Hebrew letter has 7 meanings and every word has 70. And the reason they say that is because with the 7 meanings for each letter, whenever you take letters and make words, you can see how each word can have a multitude of meanings based on the letters that comprise the word. So if you look at this amazing word, salvation, Yeshua, the name of our Savior in Hebrew, reading from right to left, it means the hand that destroys the establishment of the eye. Our buddy Nimrod, that we talked about in the previous session. He is the one that destroys the eye on the back of your dollar bill and everything associated with it. Here's something really cool. Remember we talked about Mount Hermon, where it was located? This is the mountain range right here. It's a very interesting conversation took place at the base of Mount Hermon right here. Caesarea Philippi. Is where at the end of Jesus' ministry, he took his disciples and he says, who do men say that I am? That was a strategic location because right there is the altar of the Greek god Pan. Pan was the Greek god of shepherds. So the good shepherd stood in front of the Greek god of shepherds and said, hey, who do people say that I am? Oh, some say Elijah, some say Jeremiah. No, Peter understood. Just off to the right of that location where Pan was is a foothill, and at the top of this foothill is the fortress of Nimrod. The first Antichrist who tried to create a one-world system without God. In fact, his desire was to kill God. If you're looking at the altar of Pan, Nimrod's fortress is to the right. To the left is this location right here, which is the gates of Hades. He was standing right next to the gates of Hades when he said, the gates of Hades will not prevail. He was standing right next to it. You can go there today. I've always maintained Hades is not just a place, it's the brother of Zeus. 6 days later, Scripture says that Yeshua took Peter, James, and John to the top of a high mountain. Well, Mount Hermon is by far the highest mountain in the region. They're in the area anyway, so most scholars believe, as I do, that is the location of the Mountain of Transfiguration, where today there is a UN radar outpost sitting on top of it. Right across from a cross that people have set up as the location believed to be where the Mountain of Transfiguration took place. What's the UN doing with a UN radar outpost on top of the spot where the fallen angels landed? I understand the strategic location, Syria and all of that, I get it. But from that location, they can look right down into the valley to the very location where the 200 watchers came in the days of Noah, or days of Jared, I should say, right? Pre-flood world, Genesis chapter 6. Yeshua could look down, and the UN can look down there today. Why did he bring his disciples there to ask that question? I could never understand that because he gets so excited when Peter says, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You read Yeshua's response, right? He gets so excited. I'm like, why is he so excited about that? When the day he was born, angels declared he was the Son of God, right? As he got older, everybody told him he was the Son of God. He picks Nathanael to be a disciple, and he says, you are the Son of God. He says, why? Because I saw you under the fig tree? You're going to see greater things than that. Every time the demons-possessed people saw him, they threw themselves on the ground and cried out, "You are the Son of God!" And he told them to be quiet. So from the day he was born and all through his life and all through his ministry, people told him he was the Son of God. So what's the big deal when Peter says it at the end of his ministry? His destination was Jerusalem. He takes a massive detour and goes all the way up to the top of Israel, to the base of Mount Hermon in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, parks in front of the Greek god of shepherds, says, "Who do men say that I am?" Some say Jeremiah, some say Elijah, some say one of the prophets. Oh, if I was shooting the scene as a filmmaker, I would see it like this, where Peter is looking at Yeshua and his back is to the altar, and it's called a rack focus. Yeshua goes out of focus, pan comes in focus. This is Peter's point of view. Pan goes out of focus, Yeshua comes back in focus, and Peter goes, "Oh, I get it." See, he understood the book of Enoch. That's clear. We saw that in the other scriptures, right? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God, not the son of Zeus. Oh, yeah, that's right, Peter. And upon this rock I'm going to build my church. Not these rocks behind me. That was an altar that looked very similar to Petra, like a city in the rock. It was a big embedded, place in the rock for Pan. If I could put it in modern terms, I would use the movie Rocky. Rocky is not a movie a series, is 6 movies. It's not about boxing. Yeah, it's got boxing on there, but it's an allegory. As a filmmaker, as a writer, I know nothing makes it onto the movie screen without a lot of preparation, a lot of meetings, a lot of deliberation. Everything is very intentional, everything that ends up on the screen. First thing that comes up on the screen, you fade up from black, is a picture of Jesus. Very first shot. Rocky 1. The camera pulls back, and you see Rocky fighting Spider Rico. Notice what it says behind him, resurrection. Right? Rocky's fighting Spider Rico. Rocky's a nobody at this point. Rocky, the Rock, right? He's fighting a nobody. But he's given the opportunity of a lifetime. He's given the opportunity to fight Apollo Creed, the heavyweight champion of the world. Who's Apollo? Apollo is Nimrod. What's Creed? Creed is the belief system of a people group. Rocky, the Rock, is given the opportunity to go against Apollo Creed, the heavyweight champion of the world, the god of this world, right? What does he do before the big fight? He walks into the ring, he surveys the ring. What does he see when he's there? He sees this picture of a giant, Apollo. He goes home and he has his Garden of Gethsemane experience of doubt, maybe a little fear. Talks with Adrian. He gets a renewed strength and he says, "I don't care if I beat him. I just want to go the distance with Creed." Nobody has ever gone the distance with Creed. What that meant was nobody's gone head to toe with the world heavyweight champion and stood for 15 rounds. That was his ambition. He went into the ring, took the beating of his life from the world heavyweight champion. For 15 rounds, Apollo Creed unleashed everything he had on him. But at the end of 15 rounds, Rocky was still standing. Shocked the world. Everybody freaked out. The announcers are going, "Rocky, what was going through your mind? Rocky, what were you thinking?" And as they're saying that, the camera cuts to Adrian coming in through the back door, making her way, and the only thing on his mind is he kept saying, "Adrian!" He kept calling out for his future bride. Adrian came running. Paulie let her in under the ropes. She comes into the ring. The last line in the movie, she says, "I love you." He says, "I love you." I cry when I watch Rocky movies, right? Because I see this stuff. Mainly because of spending the time that I had in Caesarea Philippi, and I understood what Peter, I think, picked up. It's a pretty huge revelation. I can use that as a little allegory, as a word picture, to show you what I believe Yeshua was doing when he went to Caesarea Philippi. And oh, by the way, Rocky 2, the Rock, goes back into the ring, right? First he gets married, and then he beats him. What's coming up next, right? From that location, Yeshua could look down to the gates of Hades and the altar of Pan, you know, the Mountain of Transfiguration, where, if they use the Rocky analogy, Mickey and Polly showed up to give him a pep talk. Moses and Elijah, right? You can look down to the fortress of Nimrod. It says that from that point on, after he left from that experience right there, it says he went preaching about his death, burial, and resurrection. And he headed straight from there to Jerusalem, where he would go 15 rounds with the devil, so to speak, and still be standing when it was over. That's why he took him to Caesarea Philippi. Because that location, remember the first prophecy in the Bible, the seed of Eve will crush the devil's head. So the attempt was made on Mount Hermon. So right before the big fight, Yeshua went to the very spot where that plan was hatched to try to prevent him from existing in the first place. He looked down and said, yeah, I got your number, Nimrod. Pan. All right, you just wait. And what's amazing is it says that he first went down, where did he go after he died? Remember? Went down into the depths of Hades. And he preached to those in prison. Horrible translation. Caruso. He heralded in victory. Tartarus, to the prison of the gods. He went down there and said, you tried to stop me. I won. I'm taking the keys. And oh, by the way, I'll be back and it ain't going to be good for you. Rob paraphrase. That's what our Savior did. That excites me, man. That just charges me up. And that explains the question, who do you say that I am? I believe that this revelation is something we need to get for such a time as this. What did he say? Upon this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overpower it. The gates of Hades. What's a gate? Something goes in and out of. Something's coming back through the gates of Hades. What's the fourth horse? The fourth horseman of the apocalypse. Gray horse, pale horse. Its rider is death. What follows him? Hades. What does that mean? That means Tartarus is going to be opened up in the last days. That's Joel chapter 2. The locust of Joel chapter 2. There's a whole bunch of people in the body of Christ out there thinking that and Sarah Palin's one of them, thinking that they are the Joel 2 army. I'm like, guys, read Joel chapter 2. That is not a description of believers. That is a description of the Nephilim army. It's the locusts that come out of the bottomless pit in Revelation chapter 9. The 200 million man army, they're not the Chinese, they're not the Muslims, they're not the Russians. And the description, they don't look like anything like people. The 200 million man army of Revelation are the 200 million locusts that are coming out of the gates of Hades. But if we understand this revelation, they will not overcome it, us. But you got to understand it first, right? You got to know what you're fighting, right? And again, that's the whole reason for our TV series, Seed. Our stated mission statement is to plant seeds that will enable people to understand the time we're living in and to walk in the power of the kingdom that comes only through a relationship with Jesus Christ. The trick is to do that in a way that the world can receive it. Now, like I say, this makes for fantastic science fiction, the stuff I'm talking about. I happen to think it's real. And I think if we can put these images up in a compelling enough way, then we can convince other people of the truth of what's going on in these last days so they do not fall prey to the coming great deception. I've got a little 2-minute trailer that I put together just to show you what Seed's all about. We didn't have the money to go shoot it in live action, so we created a concept animation just sort of as a way of showing it. The actual TV series was shot with live actors, but just for sake of illustration, we created a little 3-minute trailer. My name is Zach Randall. Everyone thinks I'm dead, but I'm not. December of 2002, my unit was sent to Iraq looking for weapons of mass destruction. On the night of Christmas Eve, we found one.
Not today, Azazel.
I don't know what happened to me that night, but my quest for answers begins here. I think that might be something the world might kind of get excited about. Yeah, well, the thing about science fiction, and that's the reason why, first of all, I'm a sci-fi fan myself, but it's the preferred genre for this sort of stuff because people go into science fiction suspending their disbelief, just by nature. So if you've suspended your disbelief, that means you're open to believing whatever I want to show you. And just like Yeshua did, he taught culturally relevant stories using parables, right? He taught stories about fishing and farming that illustrated kingdom principles. He didn't walk around with scrolls under his arm going, Obadiah says and Nahum says, like most Christian films do. Paul says the carnal mind cannot discern the things of the Spirit because they're spiritually discerned. So what are we trying to beat people over the head with the Bible that they have no frame of mind to understand? What if we told culturally relevant stories that they can relate to and make it cool? Because usually word association, you say, Christian movie. Next thing most people say is cheesy. Usually. So we're trying to overcome all of that and just come at it from this angle, using this material, but to use it in a way that will illustrate all the things that I've been talking about here today. So again, I thank you for joining us here. And for more information, if you want to look online, it's seedtheseries.com. There's an awful lot of the material that I was talking about today in this seminar and the previous one if you do /blog. And if you believe in what we're doing, we're trying to reach the world. I mean, we've already established the church isn't talking about this. There's 300 million people in the country and 7 billion people on the planet. This, I believe, is the way to get it into the mainstream to an awful lot of people all around the world. And of course, the gospel message will be laced in it as well as a seed, so to speak. Thank you.